7:05 TSN 690. It's Game Points with Matthew Ross, the second hour of the program. We're here until 8 o'clock tonight. Matthew Words on Twitter. If you want to tweet at me, Matthew at tsn690.ca is the email address. Mo Khan is here in studio as well. Mo Khan 19, Stefano Michela, S. Michela 9, and Jimmy G on the board. We're talking some NFL free agency here, and we'll bring in our next guest. He is the NFL editor of SportsNetwork.com, also a syndicated columnist, and you can follow him on Twitter.com/JFMcMullen. It is John McMullen. Hey, John, how you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Well, thanks for coming on the program, John. Obviously, it's been a flurry of activity over the last few weeks, and it's hard for the simpletons like myself to keep track of it unless we have someone like you on. So let's get right to it. There obviously have been some major signings, some mundane ones. We were talking in our previous segment about some of the more disappointing one or overvalued ones. Where do you rank Julius Thomas on that one with the Jacksonville Jaguars? Was this a case of an organization just needing to bring in a name and overpaying as a result, or did you think it was a good signing by them?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, to tell you the truth. I mean, that's what free agency is. If players get to free agency by nature, especially if they're Pro Bowl level players like Julius Thomas, they're going to get overpaid. That's just the nature of the aspect, and that's why it's not good to build your team through free agency. And that's why, when people talk about winners and losers, I always point to the Green Bay Packers as winners, and they never do anything because they do it the right way. They build through the draft. They sign their own. They keep their own. They did it this year with Randall Cobb, and they did it this year with Brian Bulaga. And these other teams, most notably Jacksonville and Oakland, who have so much cap space, they have to spend some of it. So you look at the best players in free agency. Julius Thomas was certainly one of them, and to get a player of that talent certainly helps. But when you think about the salary cap in future years, you have to think, a step ahead, 2 steps ahead, 3 years ahead even. And you have to allocate assets properly for each position so that when you are ready to compete as a high-level playoff contender, you have the right pieces in place. And that's where a lot of these teams that overspend for free agents, they get stuck in the muck, so to speak.
John, when you look at the New Orleans Saints and Miami Dolphins, both teams literally did an excavation of their whole blueprint, their team plans here. Who do you think comes out of this as the winner moving into April?
Well, I don't think either of those two teams, and that's, a perfect example again was Ndamukong Suh, who's a tremendous player. He's probably the second best defensive lineman in football. But the fact you have to pay him that much money, you have to have that much guarantee, you just look at history. It proves time and time again, especially in a position, as dominant as Suh can be at times. Let's face it, a defensive tackle is not as impactful as, say, a quarterback or even a left tackle or a star pass rusher, maybe even a shutdown corner. So to allocate that much money for a player like that, if I were a betting man, I would say that's going to hurt the Dolphins down the line. You saw it already a couple of years ago. The Dolphins were proclaimed the winners of free agency by everyone when they signed Mike Wallace and Daniel Ellerbe and Philip Wheeler. All three of those guys are gone, 2 years later, basically. So, it passes prologue and improves it time and time again. As far as the Saints go, they were one of the few teams in salary cap hell. So I think, they looked at it and said it's time to rebuild. It's time to kind of tear this thing down and start to rebuild. And unfortunately, that's one of those hiccups you have to go through, and every franchise has to do it at times.
John, is the Eagles' backfield better than it was a couple weeks ago with DeMarco Murray and Ryan Matthews coming in, essentially replacing LaShawn McCoy?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it's a better fit for what Chip Kelly wants to do, and I know he was frustrated by LaShawn McCoy's running style. Basically, too much dancing, too much east to west, a lot of Barry Sanders in him, and Chip Kelly would get frustrated. Even benched him at times last year in key situations for people like Darren Sproles and Chris Polk, who obviously you don't think about them as names like Shady McCoy, but he got frustrated, and he saw a running back that was always going for the home run instead of taking the 3 or 4 yards that were there at times. And Murray's more of that kind of back. He's going to be able to get that 4 yards and move the chains, but he's also, as he proved this year, leading the NFL in rushing. He's also capable of breaking one. So I think, from a pure football sense, I think they improved themselves in the backfield.
Chatting with John McMullen of SportsNetwork.com, also a syndicated columnist right here on Game Points with Matthew Ross. Wanted to ask you about Andre Johnson and Frank Gore going to Indianapolis. I mean, obviously these are guys past their prime. That said, though, very hungry to win in the playoffs. Pretty good regular season pedigree and probably a pretty good presence in the locker room as well. But the consensus here on our panel earlier in the program was that you're getting old. You're getting older when you bring these guys in, and for a team in Indianapolis that we thought was building for the future. All of a sudden, we have to win right now.
Well, yeah, but I think that's what free agency is about, and free agency is more important for teams that feel they're on the cusp of winning a Super Bowl title, and that's what the Colts feel they are, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. Because, they think about it, all right, they got blew out, they got blown out, but they still were in the AFC Championship game, so they were 60 minutes away from being in the Super Bowl. And obviously they have Andrew Luck, so they're going to be a high-level team moving forward for at least 5-6 years, barring injury. So I think that's the kind of team that should seize the moment, so to speak, and take advantage of veteran players. And they did that. Not only Frank Gore and Andre Johnson, as you mentioned, but also Trent Cole and Todd Hermans and Kendall Langford. So, I think they are in a position where they took a shot. They grabbed for the brass ring, and I think it was a prudent move because I see the Colts as a team that is close to being a legitimate Super Bowl team.
John, how much do the Niners regress given who's left this team after this season?
Oh, tremendously. I think if there's one team that you can look at that's regressed more than any other, it's probably the 49ers, who entered last season as a legitimate Super Bowl contender. Obviously, it didn't work out that way. And we talk about the talent they lost, and we mentioned Frank Gore, Patrick Willis retired, Justin Smith, players like that, and that hurts. But I think even more so is what they've lost in the coaching aspect of it, and to have. People think Jim Harbaugh, but they had three heavyweights. They had Jim Harbaugh, they had Greg Roman as offensive coordinator, they had Vic Fangio as defensive coordinator. So I think they've taken an incredible step back in the coaching ranks, and they've lost a ton of talent. You just can't lose, players like Patrick Willis and Justin Smith and Frank Gore and expect it not to hurt you moving forward.
John, one of the things on offense that Buffalo did do right last year was run the ball. So why trade for LeSean McCoy? And secondly, Matt Castle. I mean, what are they thinking here? I really thought that they would make a play for someone who more recently had won games. Take nothing away from what he did in New England and then Kansas City. It's been a while since Matt Castle was a pretty good quarterback, or at least regarded as one in the NFL. I thought maybe they would go after someone like Hoyer, who at least had some wins recently under his belt. Your thoughts on, of course, McCoy, but more so on the quarterback position in Buffalo?
Well, I don't have a problem with it. He is a placeholder, and for teams looking for a quarterback, this is not the year to be looking for it. That's the bottom line. I mean, there's only two in the draft: Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota, that are going to have first-round grades. And, if you look at free agency, the top-rated guys were people like Mark Sanchez and Jake Locker, and Jake Locker retired. So, I think what they look at as Castle is similar to what Minnesota did last year, and they want him to be a placeholder for a young quarterback and kind of teach him and manage the game. And he was doing well last year with the Vikings until he broke his foot. So, if you look at it, I would rather have Matt Castle than Brian Hoyer. I would rather have Matt Castle than Ryan Fitzpatrick. So it's the best of a bad lot, but it's a guy who understands how to win in this league. And they've kind of copied what Minnesota was trying to do last year. It obviously didn't work out because of the Adrian Peterson problem, but they're going to run the football, and they went out and got a top-tier back. And not only that, they also got Jerome Felton, one of the few fullbacks that's still used in the NFL, and he might be the best lead isolation blocker there is. So they're going to pound the football, and they're going to expect Matt Castle to not make mistakes, and I think that's one thing he does well as long as you play from the lead. Obviously, if you get down 7-10 points, Matt Castle's not the guy you want, but either is Brian Hoyer, either is Ryan Fitzpatrick. So I think they made the best decision they could, and it is what it is. You can't find the top-tier quarterback this offseason.
He is John McMullen, and the website is sportsnetwork.com. Check out the coverage for the NFL as this free agency period continues to develop. Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.